the Happy Scientist podcast. Each episode is designed to make you more focused, more productive, and more satisfied in the lab. You can find us online at bitesizebio.com/happy scientist. Your hosts are Kenneth Vogt, founder of the executive coaching firm Vera Claritas, and Dr. Nick Oswald, Ph.D., bioscientist and founder of Bitesize Bio.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Happy Scientist. And today we're giving Nick the day off because we have an operation that is just lousy with scientists. So today we're going to be having a conversation with Dr. Laura Grassie, who is a senior managing editor. Or you're managing editor. I don't know. What is your title here? Do you know?
That's an interesting question. Yeah, I'm managing editor.
Managing editor at Bitesize Bio. Yet another scientist to bring some perspective to this, and she's a Ph.D. molecular biologist. And as you all know, I'm not a biologist. My background is computer science, and in that regard, when it comes to science, it doesn't usually go any farther than math for me. Doesn't even get to physics because I'm a software guy. Whereas I look at that title, Laura, and I see molecular and biologist, and the molecules and biology. Well, you're going to bring a whole new flavor to this. And by the way, the way this particular episode came about, Nick had suggested that we should ask some of our scientists topics they think should be covered. And I thought, well, that's a good idea, since they have mostly been posited by me, a few by Nick, but mostly by me, and I'm the last guy you should ask, right? Well, I put together a list of things that I thought would be worth talking about, and put it by some of the PhDs here at Bitesize Bio, and said, what do you think about these? And mostly they said those sound like good ideas. And I'm like, whoo, that's good. And they said, and you left a few out. And one of the ones that got left out was this one. And that is how unlinking your identity from your work can make you happier and work better. Now, this was suggested by Laura. Well, and I thought, well, since Laura made the suggestion, surely I should put her on with me and we can talk about this. So here she is. So I want to start off with a kind of a smart aleck question. We've all heard of the French philosopher Rene Descartes and how he said, "I think, therefore I am." And I started wondering about that, and I thought, I wonder how many scientists out there believe that I work, therefore I am, and they think that's the truth. So I want to put that question to you, Laura. What do you think? Is this a common outlook?
Yes, and it's definitely one I felt when I was in the lab as well, was that my entire identity was based on not only the fact that I worked, but what I did. I think that a lot of people in science would identify with that phrase, "I work, therefore I am," actually. So I think that's quite a good twist on the philosophy quote there.
So why do you suppose that is? What is it about science that causes that to be a common outlook?
I think there's a few different things, actually. One of them probably could be the roots of science, where it came from a hobby. It came from what people did in their free time. So in some ways did define them. But also I think there's a very big negative culture in science too, that it should be your life revolving around science. And there's a degree to that has to happen. Experiments and depending on what you're working on a 9-to-5 job, it's very difficult to fit that into 9 to 5. So there's quite often times you'll be in the lab, late or on weekends or things like that. And if you're not careful, it's very easy for that to then take over and your entire life to be dictated by the job.
Sure. And I imagine that's not entirely unique to science. I certainly know a lot of engineers that are very driven that way. I know a bunch of entrepreneurs that are driven that way. And it's a cultural thing too, and this may differ from culture to culture. You can tell by listening to our voices that Laura and I are in slightly different cultures, but we're both in Western culture. But I wonder, for those out there who are in Asian culture, say you're in Chinese culture, you're in Japanese culture, or you're in Indian culture. In America, I'll say this, and I think it's probably true for the Western world in general. If you ask somebody about themselves, the first thing they'll tell you is their name. And the next thing they'll tell you is what they do for a living, what they do for work. And I know in other cultures, it might be that you tell people the town you come from or the family you come from. But it's a big deal in Western culture that who you are is associated with what you do for work. And that is not an automatic connection. Because remember, there was a time before you had a job, let alone a job in a lab. You just used to be Billy on the block, But then one day, what became more important was that you are a lab-based scientist. And in some cases, it's a matter of pride. It's like, and you should be proud of it. You worked very hard to get to this level. I've worked very hard, and yet I can't work in a lab because I haven't done the right work to get there. And there are plenty of people that have tried and failed to get there. So the fact that you got there, that's not something to look down upon. On the other hand, it's not automatic that you are that work. So, and part of the question might be then, is it necessary? If you're going to succeed in this work, do you have to be identified to such a degree with your work to be successful? So I'll put that question to you, Laura. Is identity as a scientist a critical factor in being successful?
No, I don't think it is, actually. And, we've been lucky at Bitesize Bio to talk to some really successful scientists. And actually, when you talk to them, they are so much more than just the job, with outside hobbies and things like that. So I actually think that, no, you absolutely do not have to be just what you do. And it's actually, to say it's detrimental in some ways, I think, to do that as well.
Okay, so let's widen out on that a bit, because it might be, you could say, well, you don't have to, but it helps. But you just made the comment that potentially it hurts. So how might it hurt?
I think it can cause you to become too emotionally involved in your work, which is the one thing you shouldn't be if you're a scientist. If you put your whole identity on what you do, then success and failure can have very dramatic consequences for your self-worth and mental health. And you can, I think that can then hamper the work you do and make it harder to succeed.
Sure. And I imagine for some of you, this is going to hit home hard. You're going to hear that and go, yeah, I took my last failure very personally. But also understand that when you take your last success very personally, that is also damaging. And it doesn't seem that way. It seems like, well, I should relish the glory of success. The problem is then you become addicted to it, and it becomes a necessary component. And you're in a business where success is not only not guaranteed, you need to fail at least some of the time. If you're not failing some of the time, you're not pushing the envelope hard enough. And I mean, that's really critical in what y'all do. So it's got to be there. So this makes me think of another thing, because this is the Happy Scientist podcast. So what does happiness have to do with the quality of your work? If I can't rely on identifying with my work, how am I going to be happy with my work? So you have any thoughts on that, Laura?
Oh, what about happiness? And
Yeah, how happy do you have to be in your job to do a good job at it?
I don't think you have to be happy in your job. I think you have to be happy in who you are as a person. And I think that would then naturally flow out to being happy in your job. But again, I think, or maybe rather, it's about being content. I think maybe chasing the constant success, which is what a lot of people would equate to being happy, is that feeling of success, again, is quite dangerous. And actually, it's more about knowing that you've put in what you need to do and whether that results in success or failure then doesn't impact your mood, but you know that the effort, so it's more marking, am I happy with my effort rather than am I happy with my result?
Sure, because part of the problem with success is it's fleeting. You're succeeding today, but tomorrow that might change. There's a lot of "what have you done for me lately" in this, and it's not your boss who's doing that, or your whoever is giving you the grant that's doing that. You're doing it to yourself. You're constantly assessing yourself. Am I measuring up or not? And if your measure comes down to how well your science is succeeding or failing, that's going to impact you personally. And ultimately, that's going to hurt you in your work, because it becomes almost bipolar. And I realize that's an actual condition, and I'm not in any way denigrating anyone who's dealing with that condition. But be clear here that there are ups and there are downs, and if you live for the ups, the downs will be devastating, and that's not good for anybody. And it's also not good for your science. How can you stay focused if you're having to deal with that kind of emotional pressure on doing your job? There's enough intellectual pressure on doing your job. There's enough tactile pressure. Things, the stuff that you have to be good at doing, that many people outside of the field might not even realize. But there are just downright physical skills that where you're just good as a mechanic in the lab, which is required, and that goes beyond intellectual effort. That is about just gaining skills, and it's one of the things that Bite-Size Bio is there to help you with, is those things they don't teach you in university that you have to learn in the lab. And some people have learned some things, and they go on to talk about it, and that's very helpful, and that will give you more of an opportunity to be happy in your job. And I like what you said earlier, Laura, that your happiness kind of flows from are you happy as a person already, outside of the fact that you're a scientist? Are you happy in your life? And that all feeds back in. It goes in both directions. Your life can start to be pressured because you're not liking your job, but your job can start to be pressured because you're not liking your life. So here's a proposal. If you're not going to be, my name is Bob and I am a molecular biologist. If you're not going to identify that way, the question is, if you're not going to be a PhD lab scientist by identity, who are you going to be? So what do you think about that? What can we offer people as things that they can identify with that will help their work and help them be happier in general?
Yeah, so this is something I've given a lot of thought to, because it was something that I've read a long time ago from actually a book by Darren Brown called Happy. And he was one of the ones that said, we have this culture of asking people, the first thing we do when we meet someone is asking them what they do. And so I tried to stop doing that. And, to think about other ways that I could describe myself to people, and to figure out who other people were, because also I think it's a really difficult thing to associate someone with a job, because you don't, scientists aren't all the same. They have different likes and dislikes. You don't really understand who a person is just by their job title. So I think actually it's more about the kind of, thinking about the kind of things that you enjoy. Are you a runner? Are you a swimmer? So it could be some sort of exercise. Are you a book lover? What kind of movies do you like to watch? Do you like to cook? Do you like to garden? What, if you didn't have to work, what would you spend your free time doing? Probably, to me, is the best way to think about who you are.
I like it. And as you pointed out, some of that stuff could be measurable things, because you could be, if you're a runner, you could be a runner who runs races, and you will have the chance to win or lose. Or you could just be a runner who runs to be outside and running. You have a choice of how you want to take that. And we've talked before how Nick Oswald is he's a rock star on the side. You know, I mean, he has a legit band, you know, and he's good at it. Now, he doesn't have to do it that way. You know, I up until his stroke, I enjoyed playing guitar and playing piano, and um, for now that is on hold. But but because I'm not entirely identified with that, I wasn't. I'm Ken and I'm a guitarist. I mean, that would have been devastating for me. I don't have to have my identity be associated with any particular thing. Um, I often say I used to be a programmer. It's not that I don't know how. I did it for decades, literally, and then I managed people doing it for a long time. So I'm very uh, I'm very aware of that part of it, but I'm not attached to it, and things can change. That's the other thing about this is that what you're identified with today can change. Laura, you got a young child at home, but at some point that young child is not going to be so young anymore, and not your association with motherhood may be different at that point. And that may be true for everybody that's a parent, or in fact, it should be true. My baby is 33. So obviously the relationship has changed, but you can keep choosing what your identity will be. And so we've talked about how this separation of identity can benefit your work to a certain degree. Things like you don't have to be associated with the failures of the job, because there are going to be failures. There are going to be times when things don't go as you wish. There are going to be times when grants get canceled. There are going to be times when experiments go just off the rails. There are going to be times when equipment breaks. There are going to be times when people quit. All kinds of stuff can go wrong. But if you don't have your identity associated with that, well, you'll roll with the punches and you'll keep moving. And in fact, if you start to identify yourself as somebody who's a problem solver, those things not only won't be negative, they will be an opportunity. I think about the movie Apollo 13, and they're trying desperately to get them home. And the conversation in the control room, somebody says, have you thought about what the press release should look like when they all get killed? And the character turns to him and says, "Well, sir, I believe this is going to be NASA's finest hour," because he believed they could solve the problem. And that's a really important thing when it comes to science. I want to comment on two things that'll be in the show notes before I forget here. One is a link to an article. It's called "You May Not Be Who You Think You Are." And it's a brief read, and it's worth looking at. And it looks at the question of identifying with your work, but some other things too. And then another one is a link to a Bitesize Bio article called "The 10 Lab Commandments," or "The Guide to a Happy Lab." That's a worthwhile read too. A little bit longer, but it's still bite size, so worth checking out. So, here you are. You've decided, okay, I've that's it. I'm no longer going to be Bob the molecular biologist by automatic definition. I'm gonna be Bob the runner. I'm gonna be Bob the musician. I'm gonna be Bob the book club member. I'm gonna be Bob the Renaissance man, and that's that. And by the way, you can be Sarah the Renaissance woman too. So, having all of these other interests, how can you feed that into your work? Now, you've mentioned how you got to sometimes be so dedicated to this work, and it could be all hours of the day, but how do you have the rest of your life feed into this work and help your work life?
I think first of all, I want to touch on one of the other things I think you brought up there, which was really good, which is it's not also about what you do, it's about who you are. So personality traits, like being a problem solver. I think that looking for the kind of identity in that way is really good as well. For example, myself, I would consider myself tenacious. I don't give up. And thinking of myself that way helps through difficult times. whether it be at work or not, to get through them. That's who I am. I can do this. I can get through it. I think in terms of how can you help your not work life feed into your work life by having an identity outside of it, is it allows you to refresh, and it allows you to take a step back as well. Because if your work is your life and it defines who you are, then you, like you said, you will take every failure very personally, and it will start to feed negatively into you, your negative, and create a very negative mindset. And I'm saying this from someone who went through this. I was very much someone during my PhD who made the job my life, and I did have interests outside of them, but I didn't really consider that to be who I was. I felt that I was a scientist. And then when for me, a career path in science just didn't seem to be the right choice. It was very difficult, even though looking back now, it was the right choice for me to leave the bench. At the time, because that was my identity, it really caused a lot of problems for me. I had a few years after I left my PhD where I just felt lost and empty, and like I had failed as a person because I hadn't followed this career path that I thought I was going to follow, and I thought that had made me a failure. But instead, if I'd spent more time, I think thinking, and now I try and do it very much where I am not what I do, but I am a person outside of that. It lets me step back and see things more objectively and put some distance between the job and me, so that I don't take those failures personally. And like you said, I think it's really important, don't take those successes personally as well. Yes, something that you do that worked really well could be because you did an excellent job. It could also be luck. And riding that success and thinking that you're a wonderful person and then letting it inflate your ego can also allow you to mess up on the job, but also, like you say, create a big problem when things do go wrong again, because you've identified that as who you are. So yeah, that separate identity feeding in, it rejuvenates you, it gives you meaning outside of the job, so that you can be more neutral. And that's what scientists should be. They shouldn't be emotional when it comes to the work. They should be neutral, and be able to see. And science is somewhere where you're going to fail a lot. That is the nature of science. So it's not like failure is going to happen once in a blue moon. For a lot of us, it happens daily or weekly. And it'll build resistance to that, and resilience to that. And instead of going, oh, I just can't get this right, it'll also, I think, allow you that objectivity where sometimes some fantastic successes in science have come from failures, and just being able to, instead of go, oh, that's not right, I've done that wrong, if something goes not the way you expect, you can go, why did that happen? And maybe you'll be able to see the opportunity.
Yeah, that's interesting. I love that idea. Like, well, that's not what I expected. That's a fun state to be in. And I found that in the past with software development. Now, software is something you really don't want it to not work. But sometimes when something fails, you go, wow, how did it do that? Now it becomes an interesting thing to look at, and maybe something useful comes out of it. Maybe not, but why not? Why not take a look, see what's out there?
Yeah, agreed.
The other side of this all feeds back to your life. Like, if your work is going successfully and you're happy in your work, and you're learning things that are life lessons. There are things that you can teach to your children. There are things that you can apply in your relationships. There are things that you can apply to your own health and your own personal growth. These things aren't so compartmentalized. Your life and your work are not in these silos that don't touch each other. So that is the discussion of how you can unlink the identity, your self-identity from your work. So is there anything else, Laura, that you want to add as a wrap-up?
Just that it's not an easy process. I think something it's been ingrained into us from society as well as science in general. So don't beat yourself up if it takes you a while to start to unlink that. But just trying, I think, will make a big difference to most people.
Right. And the fact is, you've already been doing hard things for a long time. Power to you. You can do this. You can make this work. You can be happy, and you don't have to tell everybody about your PhD. All right. Well, on that note, we'll call this a wrap. Thank you so much, Laura, for being with us today, and maybe we'll hear from her again in the future because she had other ideas.
Thanks, Ken.
All right. Thanks. Bye now.
Thank you for listening to the Happy Scientist podcast, helping you to become a happier, healthier, and more productive scientist. To get more Happy Scientist podcast episodes and all of our downloadables, please go to bitesizebio.com/The Happy Scientist, all one word. And in particular, you might want to spend some time on episodes 1 to 9, where we talk about the foundational principles of human needs, core mindsets, and charisma factors, which we refer to in many episodes. You can also hook up with us on Facebook at facebook.com/The Happy Scientist Podcast, all one word, to get latest episodes and additional material. We hope to see you there.
The Happy Scientist is brought to you by Bitesize Bio, your mentor in the lab. Bitesize Bio features thousands of articles and webinars contributed by hundreds of Ph.D. scientists and scientific companies who freely offer their hard-won wisdom and solutions to the Bitesize Bio community.